Hello and welcome to In-House Matters by Lorcadia, a series of short, sharp conversations with legal leaders who are improving how teams work. I'm Sasha Kirk, co-founder and chief strategy officer at Lorcadia, and thank you for joining us. Today we are talking about board packs and corporate AI and what does good governance actually look like. It will be a practical conversation on how we can improve board outcomes, manage risk without slowing growth. Today, I'm joined by Jacinta Dale, the Executive Director and Founder at Abel-Dale Law. Jacinta is a fractional general counsel, governance professional, and not-for-profit board chair, leading and advising diverse organisations who need proactive, strategic legal and governance support. Jacinta has held general counsel and senior legal positions at organisations including JBS and Thames Water, and holds qualifications with Governance Institute of Australia and the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Jacinta founded her private practice with a specific purpose of working with boards of fast-growing companies who want and need governance that supports growth. I've personally known Jacinta for a number of years, and I'm really excited to have her here sharing her knowledge and experience with our community.
Thanks so much for having me, Sasha. It's really great to be here.
In my role at Lorcadia, I lead our AI strategy, and I'm also a director on our board. So I am both personally and professionally interested in the topic that we're discussing today. I've been spending the last couple of months really down in the ditches of AI and learning more about it than probably I really want to be knowing. It's been a very interesting time. Board governance has certainly come under the spotlight in recent weeks with the release of the Star Entertainment judgment. And I'm not a legal expert, but I've been doing a lot of reading around the topic. And what stood out for me was the acknowledgement that modern board papers have become impractically long and oppressive. They talked about one board paper being 265 pages long, and directors may now be turning to AI to interpret and summarize board packs. So I think we're in this interesting place where we're using AI to generate more information, which is probably going into these board packs, and then using AI to summarize and digest it. And so there's a lot to unpack about what good governance looks like in the context of corporate AI. So I'm keen to hear, Jacinta, from your perspective, what are the key changes to board governance over the past 12 to 18 months and why?
I think when we are talking about AI, 12 to 18 months ago, we were talking about generative AI policies. And we've all moved past that, which I think is exciting as much as we all have policies, because now it's just taken that there are such policies. I was at the AI Cities Governance Summit earlier this month, and that was a really interesting session. And the two central themes I took away from that event were around AI and productivity and how those two things come together in the future of work. There is more and more talk of AI in the boardroom, and that's moving towards agentic AI or having your AI director that can contribute to discussions, which is really interesting. And there have been early adopters who are already doing this. I think more generally, it is a difficult time to be a director. I think there's significant regulatory issues. They're often making headlines. There's a whole raft of external factors that can sometimes feel like you just get through one and you're coming into the next one. And community expectations of directors and whether they should be accountable, or their view is that they should be accountable. So those expectations are at an all-time high. So while boards should be like noses in, hands out, in practice, that's really difficult for boards to get that balance right. When you've got directors, they know they will be judged on what they should have known or should have done in the court of public opinion. It's not usually the court of law. And that is all with the benefit of hindsight, of course. So that can lead to a good deal of risk aversion in the boardroom. But of course, there's risk in everything, including AI, and including doing nothing or delays or tying up resources in reporting. So I think good boards are adopting that active inquiring engagement with their exec team and their companies to demonstrate the inquiring mind Justice Lee referred to in the Star judgment.
And from what you're seeing, why are board packs getting bigger? And is that more to do with that there's more to report on, or is AI accelerating the content that's being created and causing some of this problem as well?
Yeah, and look, board packs are definitely getting bigger. And I think 260 pages is probably not terrible in the scheme of corporate
No,
boards.
that's just so scary.
And I think that's coming from two places. So the first one is the regulatory landscape. So it just keeps getting more and more complex and it's more layered. And the reports are getting more and more granular. A decade ago, we were all talking about ESG. We're still talking about ESG, but we're also talking about cyber. And since 2020, there's been a lot of discussion about supply chain resilience. And that is, of course, still relevant because of all the geopolitical issues right now. So then you've got your management teams who feel they need to cover all these angles. And just in case sometimes no one wants to be the one who left something out of a report. So that is a difficult situation, both for boards and execs. And then secondly, you do have AI. So AI, I love AI. AI is wonderful. It can produce a really beautiful report. And look, it's not just the AI. We're all using IT tools that can produce beautiful graphics with all the data that we have. So it started with the data and then how that data can be processed. And then you put AI on the top. And you've got these incredibly long, detailed reports, and you can bang them out in a couple of minutes. And they're incredibly impressive. Whereas once upon a time, your exec member would have had to write it and it would have been 2 pages long because that's all they had time for. So while undoubtedly that really long report has plenty of useful information in it, it does dilute focus on the material matters, the things that really matter and the things that boards should be talking about.
In those situations where we're seeing those board materials grow and the directors still have those duties to uphold and being across it, how can the board control the information it receives to prevent that information overload and ensure they're still getting that relevant material information?
I think Justice Lee's Star decision is a really clear call for boards they need to take back control of the information they receive. The problem with doing this on the fly or meeting by meeting is that directors, many of whom are or were executives, are trying to give guidance to an exec team on what should or shouldn't be in those reports. And if you've got 10 directors, you probably have 10 different views on what that should look like. So it's really about structuring that process. Most boards are or should be doing an annual board evaluation, which includes a review of the packs. If that isn't enough, then you could always look at a special board session or a working group to really take control and drill into what are the issues and what do we really need to be seeing. I'm a really big fan of simple rules, getting that group of the board and exec together and coming up with what will work. So executive summaries up the front, clear recommendations, parameters around what's for decision, what's for noting. Well, the purpose of the reports should be clear from the report, but also the agenda. And then you can talk about standards for length and structure and clarity, because execs often talk in acronyms and special speak, and most boards are very savvy. They understand acronyms, but when you're trying to digest a lot of information and quickly, sometimes that can be too much. So once you've got that agreement around the rules, and the exec team has to be part of it because they need to live with it, and then you've got the COSEC or the company secretary who becomes the gatekeeper. And provided everyone's already agreed that this is the way the world should look like, that should be an easier job for the COSEC. Otherwise, they've got a bit of an uphill battle. And it's not about giving the board less information. Sometimes board packs are just chunky. If you have to attach, you find end of year financials are always a big document. So there's always going to be chunky packs out there. So it's not necessarily about giving them less information. It's about giving them the right information and in a way that helps your board members really engage with what's in that board pack, rather than just seeing it and just feeling immediately overwhelmed and trying to sift through and work out for themselves what doesn't matter. And I think when you're on the other side of the fence, in your management or exec side, it's really helpful when there's clear expectations and you're not trying to manage a range of views. And you can get that focus back on decisions and not data dumps. And that's better for everyone because management come to the board looking for decisions so they can carry on. So I think it's a win-win to have some agreed protocols around what should and shouldn't be in that board pack.
I really like that. So coming to an agreement about what are the simple rules that we're going to follow, but then also that focus about making sure that there's that structure and focus at the beginning of the pack so people can be really clear about what do they need to be focusing on.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference. These feel like simple and traditional approaches that they work, and they work for a reason.
So thinking about AI use, it's growing. And to be honest, I think we're only at the very beginning. We're not at the pointy end at all by any means. We're really at the beginning of where AI is going. What are the biggest governance issues that you see when it comes to using AI in the board environment?
I think there's some fantastic efficiency benefits, but of course, in the board context, there's plenty of issues that come with it. The one that comes front of mind is over-reliance. So directors hold that position as a person. They have to use their human judgment, and that's always going to remain important. And that is something that came out of that Star decision as well. But if you've got directors who are leaning too heavily on AI to summarise or analyse or highlight the issues, then they risk missing the nuance. And again, that just comes back to the paper piece. Boards shouldn't have to be doing these things for themselves. It should be a bit easier for them. Of course, we've got data security and privacy as some of those major issues. You want to give directors the tools they need so they're not even thinking about public AI tools, because we all know that's just a real issue. And again, there's generative AI policies in place, so you would hope that boards aren't doing things like that. And then, of course, there's accuracy. So hallucinations are a real thing. Behind me,
we talked about that this morning.
On this side is a logo of 2 parrots. And when I said to AI, create this room for me, it kept giving them eyes because it found a gap and it had to fill it. It just couldn't not fill it. And that is a real issue. Boards have to be making decisions using the right information, not the sort of mostly right information. So while AI can be very helpful to support the board's work, but also the execs work in presenting papers to the board, it just can't make sense of that really critical information for directors at this stage.
I think one of the other challenges that we've come across is that AI is so agreeable. And there's research papers that have been released looking at the agreeableness of different LLMs. And I think they all come back to support the same type of thing, that they can be very agreeable. And I think some people have different experiences. They find their experience with AI can certainly be a bit more constructive. But I guess in my experience, it's too agreeable. And I think that also then becomes a risk. So if you are asking challenging questions of AI as it's trying to analyze a situation or suggest perhaps gaps, that it could just be giving you that false sense of security. And I think that's a concern as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that is something that directors see as a big benefit of AI. You can say, what are we missing? What else should we be talking about? But if it's just going to go, oh, no, you've done a great job, then that's not obviously going to achieve that benefit.
And I know that some boards consider AI through a risk appetite lens, and what's appropriate for one may not be appropriate for another. The use of AI transcripts, I think, is a good example here. So there are some boards that they love using AI transcripts because it helps, where there are other boards where they are like, actually, there's too many risks involved in this, so we're not going to be able to use it. And that comes with those trade-offs. What's your perspective on this?
Board transcripts. So in my sort of legal capacity, I just shudder at it. In my COSAC capacity, I'm like, oh, this could be useful. And then as a director, my roles are in not-for-profit. So the risk profile is quite different and a bit more relaxed, especially if it can free up that team to do other things. And that's one of the upsides of AI-generated transcripts, right? Like, there can be a huge time saver. So when you've got really complex boards that are meeting frequently or dealing with complex issues, the transcripts can really help. But at the other end of town, you've got really tiny teams and tight budgets. It can free them up to do other things. So I think when you're looking at a risk benefit analysis, and I think that the risk appetite lens is the right way to go, that there's definitely some pros there. All boards are different and they have different risk appetite profiles and so on. So I think that's the starting point. So with some of the boards I work with that they do use AI, others avoid it entirely. So weighing up some of those pros and cons, the real trade-offs, you're talking privacy risks, cybersecurity risks, depending on how it's managed, potential discovery in litigation. And I think one of the ones that's really concerning is, again, that director risk aversion, that possibility that directors will be less engaged in the discussion and with the materials, knowing that this transcript exists. Because again, here's something else.
It's going to be on record.
Yeah, that's what they can be judged on later. So I think for boards that are introducing AI transcripts, that can be done in a really controlled way. So whether you're only using the transcripts for certain sessions, like you're turning it off when it's in camera, perhaps you're turning it off when there's a legal professional privilege matter, perhaps you're turning it off when there's some really spicy discussion, because you do want people to be able to speak really freely and not be concerned about that. It's also about keeping that access tight, making sure any transcripts created to help draft those minutes is retained. There's a clear document retention protocol, so perhaps not retained indefinitely in most situations. There's a joint opinion from the AICD and Governance Institute about the use of AI that got updated recently about AI and minute taking and so on. And it is a really useful place to begin and think through some of those issues. I think it is really important that boards make that conscious decision and they document it and they don't just drift into the AI transcript because that's just what is happening. I think if you get that protocol in place, it is the best place to begin. And then as you go, you can work through the risks and when you'll use it and how.
What I really liked with what you said is this idea of, as you're going through the board agenda, there's going to be discussion points, let's turn it off and just have the general note taking and then turn it back on. I think that's a really great approach. And so we're thinking then about AI and the different tool sets that people are using and boards are using. Should there be a united view about the tools that there is available or that can be used? Or is it okay to be accepting that individual directors will be doing their own thing?
Yeah, look, boards really need to have a unified approach. And I think much like any other person within a business, if you don't give people the right tools, they will go and find their own. So I think it's important to be having these discussions and doing it now. The last thing you want is a director off using an unvetted tool because of all the risks around inconsistencies and data security and so on. So if you've got a board-approved AI policy, it's got some clear guidelines on what tools are used and how. That's great for the directors and the organisation. Also, if everyone's using their different tools, you're potentially getting different insights or incorrect information. And that can really throw discussions. Like you can waste a lot of time getting caught up in things that just should never have been on the table. So that's really unhelpful. And I think it's important that as a board, you don't want to shut down innovation. You want to be an adopter, but you need to do that in a safe and consistent way.
One of the things I wanted to circle back on in our discussion is using AI within the board session itself. You talked at the beginning about an AI director that's actually the AI agent. I'm
Yes.
keen to hear a bit more about what you're seeing in terms of what boards are using and the tools and I guess the role of AI in those environments.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is definitely not at the agentic AI level yet, though I do know it is happening. There are other boards who have adopted that. I think boards at the moment are probably at the record keeping piece, so the transcripts and so on. The exec are definitely using AI in generating reports. They should be using AI to help them set agendas and consider corporate calendars and board work plans and bring all that stuff together and develop consistent templates and what reports look like. So there's lots of opportunities. And I think management have probably only just begun to look at what this is, but there's tons of opportunity to use AI to produce excellent board papers when it's directed in the right approach. And then out the other end, of course, there's minute taking. Once you've got your board pack, you can produce skelly minutes pretty quickly with AI. AI is very savvy, like it can use those executive summaries and draft resolutions and the agenda outline and your last set of minutes. It can produce something like that pretty quickly. And that's a great place to start.
You've given some really good practical examples there. One of the questions that I had before we move on to questions from the audience is if you were to write a playbook on good governance best practices, this is a tricky one, what would be the top 3 pieces of advice that you would give to general counsels and company secretaries who advise and support boards?
So if I wrote it myself, it would be 20 pages long. If AI wrote it for me, it'd be 300. I think that is one of the downsides with AI. It's a bit of both. But so drawing from my experience in my various capacities, so legal advisor, co-sec, non-exec director and chair, it's probably showing my vintage, but I just think the agenda is the most important thing. No AI in the world is going to save you if you're not discussing the right things and you don't have the right papers in front of you. So it is that really clear understanding of the role of the board and what you need to be talking about. And again, AI can be used to help you with all those things, to understand your routine decisions and those board reserve matters and manage timeframes around that. I think sometimes you need to be a bit ruthless about what really needs to be in front of the board and why. And that's really difficult because I think we're stepping back into an exec role. Sometimes you want to tell the board stuff and you think your thing's really important. That can be quite difficult. But I do think the agenda setting is really important. The board papers, I think, is my next top tip, making sure that you've got that clear structure, you've got concise writing. If it is going to be a long document, you've got a 1-page summary at the front, really calling out the key points the board needs to consider. And the start judgment really warns that materials must be digestible to enable informed decisions. So that is really important. And again, you shouldn't need AI to work out what the board papers say. That should be something the board can ascertain without AI. And yeah, look, when board papers are good, meetings are better every time. So I just think that's something that really matters. Risk, I think most boards these days are very good about risk and making sure they're talking about risk in board paper or exec and board. They're talking about risk all the time and perhaps too much sometimes. And AI is just one of those risks. So we should talk about it and they should understand it. Today, that is a really critical part of that playbook because it is something that's evolving. It's something we need to keep looking at. And at this stage, it is about understanding how it's being used, making sure that's documented and treating it like any other emerging risk. So continuing to monitor it, continuing to govern it and making the policy explicit on those timeframes. And I think, again, this is showing how retro I am. Minutes, I love minutes, are some of my favorite things. And AI transcript's really helpful so that you can turn those minutes around really quickly and get them back to the board, because that is, again, something that came out of that decision, that judgment can't be outsourced. So that director's personal review of those minutes is really important. And if you can get them to directors as soon as possible after the meeting, that's their best chance to give it their attention when they can still have a good recall of what was discussed and make sure those minutes are clear and concise and complete.
That's a really excellent point. I think circling back on the risks and this importance of considering to review the risks associated with AI. I think one of the things that I've discovered as I've been reviewing some of the AI tools that are available in the marketplace, even those with enterprise subscriptions, a lot of the data is being processed in the US or the EU. So the data itself is stored in Australia, but then inference, which is the prompts and the processing, is typically done in the US or the EU. What are the risks associated with that in terms of directors' duties and cross-border disclosures? Is this something that is getting reviewed or assessed, or are regulators across what's happening here?
I think this is advancing so quickly that I think it's very difficult. The privacy legislation is really extensive, and I think everyone's probably got some really detailed privacy policies. But I think with AI, now's the time to review them and make sure they dovetail into your IT procurement process. As a small operator, I talk to all my IT providers before I sign on and have these long and detailed discussions about security and data processing. And I'm sure most IT teams are doing that too. But you're right, it's all the little bits and pieces that are all new and didn't really exist, like the prompts and so forth. And even those prompts, when boards are prompting AI to review a decision. So maybe that AI transcript isn't being kept because you've got your policy, but what's the policy about the prompts? So there's a whole lot of considerations that I think we're all still largely working it out.
I think, everyone's working it out. So the regulators will be working it out. And I think in Australia, eventually we'll have a little bit more freedom as we're opening up more data centres in Australia, and we'll have more LLMs accessible within the Australian jurisdiction. I think that will change. But until then, I would just encourage everyone to really have a good look at where their AI is being processed, because I come across some things that were really surprising for me. So a question from the audience: what is one AI use that you would encourage boards to adopt?
I think the best tool to adopt today would be a tool that would help management improve the quality of board papers. And I say that because it's a really practical application. It's a pretty low risk use of AI, and it can make a difference to decision making tomorrow. So it's one of those ones that it's almost a no-brainer, and it helps keep the director's judgment front and center, having shorter, sharper papers and saving significant time and improving that decision making, and without replacing human oversight. So that's the one I think, if we're not doing it today, we should be.
I think that's a fantastic recommendation. And the last question I've got is, you've got experience working across different boards. How does your approach with managing the boards and the board papers, how does that differ with the fast growing companies that you work with compared to others?
Fast growing companies are moving at a different speed. So decisions are quicker. You've got information flows, they're less mature, risk profiles are changing all the time. So with those boards, my approach is more about creating clarity and discipline. So really tight agendas, sharp board papers, being really clear on who's accountable for what. When you're dealing with the more established organizations at the other end of the spectrum, the challenge is often the opposite. You've got lots of process, lots of legacy reporting, and there the focus is really on trimming out the noise and helping the board get back to what actually matters to them and what decisions they need to be making. But I think, look, in both cases, you're still looking at the same thing. You want to support the board, you want them to be strategic, and you don't want them drowning in a sea of paperwork.
Thank you. That is an amazing point to finish on. That brings us to the end of this episode of In-House Matters by Leucadia. Jacinta, thank you so much for sharing such practical insights. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We will share the recording and key takeaways shortly. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, please reach out and connect with Jacinta on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to learn more about Leucadia, please visit us on LinkedIn or also at our website at leucadia.com.